Well, hello, welcome to our reset conversation. I'm Linda Seacrest, the co-founder and board member of the Southwest Florida Reset Center. We're located in Fort Myers on Shire Lane, which is just off of Daniels Parkway. We're a not-for-profit organization with the aim of reversing the effects of global warming brought on by greenhouse gas emissions and other human activities. Our focus in Southwest Florida is in a bioregion, and the initiatives that we choose to work on to which we believe will solve the water woes here in Southwest Florida are the right to clean water and regenerative agriculture. So I'm here today to welcome you to our ongoing reset conversations. I think this is number 11, and we bring on leaders in the regenerative agriculture, rights of nature, and clean water initiatives, and they educate us. RESET is an acronym. R stands for the restoration of the natural world, as much of it as we can influence from our place here in Southwest Florida. The E represents ecological, the principle that restoration results when we pay renewed attention to the natural interconnected patterns of relationships necessary for a thriving planet. The S and E that follow represents the social and economic structures and incentives that shape human society, which we must be reimagining to move us forward. T represents the hard part, the transformations of our institutions, our practices, and even ourselves from the top down. From the highest levels of human activities and authority to ourselves, our own personal commitments. So before we move on, we have a few housekeeping activities that we like to take care of. So please keep yourself muted during the program because we will be sending you out a link so that and you can share this with anyone that you want to, so that we don't like to have background noise. So stay on mute until you want to speak. The Q&A period follows afterwards, and you can actually put your questions in the chat, and Holly will be watching for those, and I think Gary will be too, and they will be asking them of Christopher after his presentation. And if it's something that you feel like you want to ask the question yourself, you can let them know. So before we move on, because of the research that I do for the writing that I do, I'm always finding really great quotes. And I found one this morning and I thought of Christopher immediately. And it's a quote from the Amazonian indigenous people that point out that Earth is a space station. So I thought about, while the International Space Station whirls around at an altitude of 250 miles and travels, imagine, 17,500 miles per hour, it gets a glimpse of the Earth every 90 minutes and realizes itself as a space station. But we here on Earth never experience that because we get to see the sun and the moon only once a day. So what they believe is that we humans have the honor of inhabiting a fragile space station known as Living Earth with no escape shuttles. And we must love and care for this living Earth, which is what Christopher is going to tell us about today. So Christopher, I think I'm going to turn this over now to Gary.
To Alex, I think, right?
Well, to Alex is, I don't.
Right, Alex.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alex, you're on. You're muted. That's the mantra they say for the 2022. You're muted.
Unmute.
Nope. Nope.
Yeah, I think we can hear you now. Yeah.
No.
Nope.
You fixed this yesterday when we tried, Alex. I think that you had to turn your sound up on your computer. Oh, we might have to have Gary do this introduction after all.
Oh, can you unmute him, Holly? Will that help?
He's not muted. It's
Oh.
something on his sound setting.
Okay.
He's coming back in.
Okay.
So, I know that Alex is going to give a very personal introduction,
Yes.
but maybe Gary could tell us just a little bit about of his bio that's in our script, if you want to do that, Gary.
I'd be happy to do that.
And then when Alex comes on, he might have a few more words, and then we'll hear from the master himself.
All right. And of course, it's our pleasure to have Christopher with us.
Here he is.
He has run the Maya Mountain Research Farm, an ongoing permaculture project in southern Belize, Central America, since 1988. Former degraded citrus and cattle land, the farm is focused on the intersection of agriculture and ecology. He managed the Toledo Cacao Growers Association in cooperation with the UK-based Green and Blacks from 1997 to 2004. And since 2004, the farm has been working on specific ways to draw down carbon with an emphasis on food security, degraded land repair, multistrata agroforestry systems, and staple tree crops. In 2019, the farm won the Commonwealth Secretary General's Innovation for Sustainable Development Award under the Prosperity category. Christopher runs the farm with his wife, Celini Logan Nesbitt. And is
Alex is here. And maybe he can get sound, and if not, we'll just keep moving.
okay. I think we will keep moving.
You can put some good stuff in the chat and we'll let Christopher get started. How's that with everybody?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
But we are very grateful to Alex, not only for being our permaculture guru at Reset and in our community gardens, but also introducing us to Christopher Nesbitt. So take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Alex, for making the world know that we exist. I'm always tickled pink that anybody cares about what we do. And I'm really happy to be here. My name is Christopher Nesbitt. I've been farming in Belize since 1988. And I came to Belize originally in 1985 as a study abroad quarter to map out languages and cultures in the country. And after about 3 years in the country, I took what would now be called a gap year. And after about 3 years, I found a piece of land that was for sale really cheap. I bought it, and it was a degraded citrus and cattle farm, and that's where we are right now. So here we go. How are we doing now?
Good.
All right. You see the full screen, or do you see the sidebar?
We see the sidebar, so we need you to hit your play button.
Play. Okay, hold on. Okay, play on this Mac. Aha.
Forget.
Yeah, so I am many things. I'm becoming better at the Zoom meeting business. So thank you for bearing with me. Again, thank you for having me. My name is, as I said, is Christopher Nesbitt. I farm in Belize, Central America, in upriver from the community of San Pedro, Colombia, Toledo district, on the upper reaches of the Colombia branch of the Rio Grande watershed. My wife and I run a small non-governmental organization called Maya Mountain Research Farm. You can see the URL there, and there's some sort of ubiquitous drone footage behind it, and our major focus is primarily on tree crops as a way to draw down carbon, retain soil and soil moisture, and provide a combination of outputs, things like food, fiber, fuel, fodder, marketable crops, medicinal crops, while retaining soil and soil moisture, creating habitat for animals. We've seen all the big cats pass through here: jaguar, ocelot, puma, margay, jaguarundi. We've seen brocket deer, white-lipped and colored peccary. We've had howler monkeys recently come onto the land, which was kind of exciting because they were not here when I first moved here. They had been chased out of the valley. And so we actually are functioning as analog forest, and it's very inviting to wildlife. We have bird watchers basically walk around the farm on the verge of a spontaneous orgasm because they see a little brown bird. So anyway, we provide habitat. This is a sort of a stolen image off of Google Earth, and it shows where we are. The little pin that says starting location, that's not where I am. We're kind of a little north of there in the building with solar panels on it. You'll see more of that in a minute. We occupy a strategic place. The Columbia branch of Rio Grande flows out of the ground. There's a little white spot on the left side of the screen where the river actually comes out of the ground, and above that is dry creek bed for much of the year. So to the north of us is largely unbroken forest going all the way to the other side of the country. Hence why we see so many birds and animals come here, because they use us as habitat, and in dry season, they come down out of the mountains looking for water. We're dealing with some of the problems of growth, just like every part of the world right now. And one of the consequences of growth, population growth, and which is exacerbated by people's entry into currency-based economy, where land use translates to money, because money is king right now. Everybody needs money for everything, which was not quite the case a few years ago. In 1980, Belize had 74.4% forest cover. 30 years later, we dropped down to 62.8% forest cover. And 4 years after that, we lost an additional 2.5% of our forest cover to 60.3% forest cover. This is troubling, but even more troubling is to our western border, Guatemala. The Petén, which is the adjacent department of Guatemala, was largely unbroken forest, had a population of 150,000 people in 1985 when I was first there, largely unbroken forest with a couple cities, small cities. And now it is largely totally deforested, except for in the north, by a combination of subsistence farming and refugees that have come down out of the highlands where they were displaced during the Civil War, and cattle ranching. And cattle ranching is also used as a money laundering device for the cartels. So we're looking at massive deforestation over there. And we're also seeing droughts that come when you get rid of trees, and water tables disappearing, and whole communities suffering from lack of access to water. The little red star in the lower left of the screen is actually where San Pedro, Colombia is in relation to the rest of Belize. So these are greenhouse gas sources for that cause the majority of the problems tied to climate change, and 24% of it is from land and food, from agriculture. Agriculture is a huge contributor to basically putting surplus carbon into the environment, and also releasing carbon through tilling and chopping and burning and all the things that we're trying not to do here. Basically, agriculture in general is pretty bad. And we have some radical solutions, which are basically we need to switch as much as possible to tree-based agriculture, so that we can produce lots of food in such a way that we're not cashing in on our historical inheritance and also cannibalizing the future, which is, in terms of biological processes, most agriculture is either one or the other or both at the same time. So we're also looking into the future, and we're seeing some pretty scary scenarios. So the region I live in looks like we're going to be pushing comfort limits by 2080, they say. One of the things that we found is that where we live on the farm, the temperature is 15 degrees cooler than it is in the village, which is about 2 miles from where we live in a straight line.
Wow.
And that is in part because of all the trees that we have. So we've got lots of trees where the sunlight is hitting trees and creating oxygen instead of hitting open land or soccer fields or metal roofs or cement buildings and creating heat. Of other concern is availability of water. We're actually in an area where we have a fair amount of water. We have a spring where we get our drinking water, and the source of the river pops out of the ground about a half a mile from where I'm sitting right now. My neighbor across the river has a spring. A lot of the communities in the foothills of the Maya Mountains have spring. And one of the saving graces for this area is that a lot of the Maya Mountains is just not suitable for agriculture. It's karst landform, it's limestone. Yet we'll see some places where mistakes are being made. So the future is worrisome. We're seeing some of the effects of climate change already. In 2017, Belize was hit by a series of floods in February, which is the beginning of our dry season. Usually rain is intermittent. We usually don't get huge floods, but we got very huge floods. And this is, I have pictures of our bega where it did damage and wiped out our corn and stuff like this. But this is much more dramatic because this is a much bigger, what we call the bega, which is a seasonally inundated floodplain where people grow their matambre corn, which is off-season corn. It's not the big slash and burn planting large acreage corn going into the rainy season. It's the tail end of the rainy season being planted, so you'll harvest in the dry season, and it's how you get your corn seed for next year. So in 2017, basically all the communities in the foothills of the Maya Mountains in the southern flank, down where we live, all of the corn was wiped out. This is problematic for a bunch of different reasons, but one of them is that many of the people that are growing corn then are growing corn specifically for seed for the coming big planting, which goes on in June or in May or June, depending. So additionally, in 2019, we got hit by a pretty severe drought. 2018, 2019, we got a pretty hard drought. And this is a corn crop in Middlesex, which is sort of in the middle of the country. And we passed by there. They had planted corn and then it died, and only a few came up and it was stunted. And I was going to get a picture of it, and I didn't. And then they planted again. I was like, I missed my opportunity to get a picture so I could show a slideshow of why annual crops are so vulnerable and fragile. And then of course they planted again and it sprouted, did really well. And then they got hit by some more dry in the middle of what should have been our rainy season. So that failed. Nothing, of course, compares to how it looked up in Cayo. This was a good friend of mine, Louis Sewell, former co-worker when we are board member of the Belize Organic Producers Association, which I was a board member of back in the 90s. He took a picture of this and I asked him for permission. This is in sort of Western Belize, not even in the northern part of the country, which is usually drier. Where the corn crop failed. It basically looks like somebody dumped a gigantic bucket of herbicide on the landscape. Most of the countries look like that, which of course led to massive fires. My wife and I, we taught at a local school called the Tumulkin Center of Learning, which is a boarding school primarily for Indigenous children from back villages who cannot make it all the way to the high school and back to their remote villages on the same day, or couldn't do it for an extended period of time without, collapsing because of the distance. Well, anyway, okay, thank you. I tried to admit somebody. And we passed this area, and this was an area that was cleared by some Guatemalan refugees who came across the border. And of course, because they had very insecure land tenure, they have no land. They went across somebody's private land. You can see some bananas down at the left side of the screen to plant corn on this hillside. And you can see in the hillside, most of that is limestone. So it's very, very thin soil, very, very poor. The corn crop failed. I mean, they got a little bit of corn out of it, but not much. And the problem in terms of climate change is the ability to retain soil and soil moisture in that area is gone. All the carbon that had been locked up there is gone. And when they cleared this area, they almost certainly encountered a species of tree we call Brassima malacostrum, also known as breadnut or Ramon nut or Maya nut, which is a highly prolific perennial staple crop from trees that can produce 7.5 tons per hectare or acre. I forget. Anyway, a lot. Produce a lot. And it's actually per acre. Yes. So 7.5 tons per acre, but where it really excels is it's in terms of energy return on energy invested. Once it's established, you're basically walking around underneath the trees, picking up food. And that was erased. There was almost certainly more Ramon production in there than the corn production they could have hoped to get for without having to erase all of that. So these are some of the problems that we face. hold on, wait a minute. Okay, thank you. This is an escaped agricultural fire. This was across the river from us. This happens almost every year. Slash and burn. Slash and burn has a place. I don't want to demonize slash and burn because it's been done successfully for millennia. The big problem is that many of the farmers don't have the sophistication that they had even 30 years ago. And on top of that, the landscapes are become more brittle and more fire susceptible. This is a fire where the guy lost control of his fire, and it burned hundreds and hundreds of acres of land, just tore off, went into the bush and did real damage. And these are some of the problems that we face. We got hit by a fire in 2008. We learned a lot from it. Number one, the regenerative forest that we call WAMIL, which is sort of an assembly of emergent species that comes in the wake of a catastrophe. Catastrophe could be a fire, it could be a hurricane. Agriculture is biologically a catastrophe. It's the emergent assembly that we have. It's got gumbo limbo, which I know you guys know. It's got Cecropia. It's got Schizlobium parahybum. They call it quamwood. They have it's basically and heliconias. That landscape is actually very brittle and fragile and susceptible to fire. So we see more of that. These are some farmers that I worked with when I managed Toledo Cacao Growers, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. They are refugees from Honduras and El Salvador. The guy with the notebook is my neighbor Ignacio Ash, who was my head extension officer when I ran Toledo Cacao Growers Association. And we had worked with these guys for about 3 years. And we had a small budget that we got through Fair Trade Foundation, and it wasn't them, but they found the funding. It was really great. We were able to do a lot with it. And we worked with them. We'd come up every 2 weeks and spend a day with them. And they made a point, they would always buy us lunch. And you know, they felt it was important to buy us lunch to show us appreciation, which was uncommon. Most farmers would give you lunch, but these guys would, like, I think one of the not one of the people here, but one of the other farmers we worked with, his wife owned the place. And so, but we would sit down in their little restaurant and have their lunch. And this day, after 3 years, none of these guys went small. They all went large. You know, like many refugees that make a move to another country, they really hit the ground running. They're trying to establish a foothold, and each one of these had 4, 5, 6 acres of these farmers here had 4, 5, 6 acres of cacao, and all of it was erased from a fire that was ignited miles and miles away, and somebody lost control of it and just turned through the bush and wiped out their cacao. And it was a very sad day for me because I had worked with these guys a lot. They were good guys. So anyway, this is a pizza, and it's a pizza that's got my very own patented, it's not actually patented, it's a moringa basil pesto with tomatoes, and I'm just gonna put that in there because we've just gone through some pretty grim stuff, you know, and it's important to acknowledge that we face a very strong set of challenges in the immediate future and the not far future, that we have a lot of challenges before us. But we're going to change the tempo a little bit, and I think most people like pizza, so I like inserting this pizza in there. Back before COVID, I would put the pizza in there to try and entice people to come intern on the farm, but we're not accepting interns anymore, so but I put the pizza in there anyway. So this is Maya Mountain Research Farm. This is where my wife and I live. I'm in that building on the 2nd floor right now. And I am looking out. We had bright sunshine this morning, then we had torrential downpour, and then we had bright sunshine, and we had torrential downpour. But right now it's kind of gray and overcast, and I don't feel any rain coming, so we're okay. What you're looking at was the heart of that was basically citrus in the foreground, and in the background was cattle pasture. And as I explained earlier, I came to Belize in 1985. I got interested in farming. I wanted to live in Belize, and the easiest way to live in Belize at the time was to either go into the nascent ecotourism industry or to go into agriculture. And in a rare moment of self-understanding, I had very extreme politics in my 20s. I still do, but I've learned how to control that. And and in a long enough conversation, I was one of those unpleasant vegetarians that makes people want to bite the head off a chicken while it's still twitching and tell you how good it tastes. And that's just anyway. So I decided to go into farming, and it was for which my life, though perhaps my pocketbook has been infinitely richer. I love what we do here. I love farming. I love trees. I love agriculture, and I like working with farmers. Sort of in line of sight, we have a combination of food species. There's coconut, and there's avocado, and there's mango, and there's breadnut, and there's mame, and there's banana, and there's papaya in there. There's tree legumes. There's an erythrina in flower. There's Susana. There's some Gliricidia. There's timber species like Mayflower, which is Tabubuya, and then there's the what do they call it? Laurel in Spanish.
Laurel.
Laurel. It's a timber. It's a Cordia Aliador. We have
Hey, Laurel.
Aliador. We have Wazuma ulmifolia, which is used for firewood. We have subcanopy species like cacao and coffee and turmeric and vanilla. And this area is actually very productive. It doesn't we've had farmers come here, we'll talk about that later, or not farmers, we had international students come here and not understand they were working in a farm. But that's what we've done. We've learned how to actually turn that around. And I think that what we've done is actually replicable, because most of the work done there was done during a time, particularly tree planting was done during a time when there was like little or no money. You know, it's just like wasn't overly. The house I built over a period of about 5 years when I was working, when I had a well-paying job. And then I installed solar part-time. Like most farmers, you maintain a couple off-farm gigs to pay the bills, and photovoltaic installation is one of our gigs that we do. So we're very much focused on solutions. And when I left Toledo Cacao Growers, we were talking about how cacao was a fantastic species for trees, because cacao itself is a subcanopy species, and having canopy above it, we saw many of the functions that primary habitat create replicated in that in a way that gave the farmer a yield. There's something called Project Drawdown, which is drawdown.org, which is a sort of a laundry list of ways to draw down carbon. And these are the ones coming from land use. And so basically all the ones that are round are ones that we do. The ones with stars are ones that we do that we think have the most promise. And the ones that have squares next to them are ones that we are not presently doing, but we intend to do. And mostly around pasture, because I am not on Team Cow with Alan Savory for this environment. I had a very good conversation with him where he admitted that cattle weren't appropriate for where we live, but yet people do eat meat. And even though I'm primarily vegetarian, I see the place for animals in a diversified thing. So my wife and I are talking about getting into sheep. And once we learn how to control quadrupeds so they don't escape and like chew stuff up that we don't want them to chew up, we're going to get into goats just for the milk. So those are the little squares are future what we would like to do. Yeah, that would be me, and the guy to the back in the dark suit. That's my stepson Wilfredo, Second Lieutenant Wilfredo Magana of the Belize Defense Force. And the tall, handsome guy next to us, enthralled by what we're saying, that would be Prince Harry. So I won an award, the farm won an award in 2019, which you can see on the side of the screen, which was sort of a red letter watershed moment for us, because it was very, very validating. We've been talking about climate change mitigation and adaptation for a very, very long time. And we've been saying like agroforestry is one of the ways to do it, and talking about strategies. How do you get farmers involved with agroforestry and which we'll talk more about in this. And then I got to go to England, and I got to meet Prince Harry. And in case you're wondering, he is absolutely as nice as you would want him to be. He's a genuinely nice guy. He came and talked with the other award winners. He hit us up with a sell it, and then everybody gave their little elevator rap, except for none of us did the he just disarmed all of us. He was just a great guy. And then afterwards, when he was going, I mentioned when I was that my stepson was at Sandhurst. He's a Sandhurst Royal Military Academy Sandhurst graduate. I mentioned that he was in the crowd, and while he was walking through on his way out, he'd prearranged clusters of people to talk to. He broke protocol. I said, wait, I want to go talk with these guys. And he came over, and I got to introduce my stepson, Wilfredo, to my very good, dear friend, Prince Harry, who I'd met like 45 minutes earlier, an hour earlier. It was a really great conversation. They talked military stuff and some of the brutalities of Sandhurst. And then we all talked about tree planting, and then he took his leave. So I just put that in there because it was a validating thing for me. And it's part of why a lot of what we're doing right now, people take what we're talking about seriously because the Commonwealth took us seriously. I am really grateful to the Commonwealth in a way that it's really difficult to explain, because I've been telling people, this is what we need to do. Hello, anybody out there? Nobody want to listen. Anyway, thank you. So we basically, to do trees, there was an article recently somebody wrote, and they were touting a Swiss techno machine that scrubbed carbon out of the atmosphere and injected it into rocks or something. It cost millions of dollars, and it took a lot of energy, and it just was totally impractical, but it made a lot of people really excited, and there was a big article about it. And then somebody brought up forestry and how forestry would do it. And then somebody else brought up the good point that, well, how do you maintain a forest 100 years in the future? How do you codify that will be forest? And how do you fund preservation of forest in 100 years? How do you do that? Knowing as I do, because I work in protected areas, my wife and I do photovoltaic installations, primarily in protected areas. Our clients include Yakshay Conservation Trust and Toledo Institute for Development and Environment, and Turnefus Atoll Sustainability Association. It's kind of a little shout out to those people if they're listening, which is unlikely, but if they ever see this. And what the work they do is, a lot of it is fighting saboteurs. And in the case of Tide and Yakshay, they are working with, and also TASA, they are working with the adjacent communities and stakeholders to get them to get buy-in. So what we're looking at specifically is, how do you get stakeholders to establish agroforestry systems that draw down carbon? The way you do that is you present them with opportunities for markets for some of their crops. One of my favorite, because I worked in the cacao industry for 7 years, is cacao, because basically everybody likes chocolate, and chocolate has great potential for farmers in the developing world. It is a subcanopy species. It does well. It needs shade, and that is actually right next to our kitchen. This is an example of a cacao tree that's actually loaded. This area here was that was former citrus, and the cacao tree is loaded. It's a very rare cultivar of cacao, which is a Criollo cacao. This is a cacao we collected from the Maya ruins of Exush and Muclebal in the Upper Bladen watershed, and which we were helicopter evacuated out by the British Army. I should have put that picture in there because it's pretty cool. But I'd spent a lot of time in my 20s wandering around lost in the jungle, and this time, and always saying, oh, okay, you go wander out for 5-6 days, and then you're there for 5-6 days. You got to walk back out. And I always said, it would be so great if they would pick us up in a helicopter. But we went into this area with a representative from Ministry of Agriculture who twisted his ankle. And then we met an archaeologist who was working there, and he got a message to Agriculture Department Ministry, who got a message to the British Army, who said they'd come pick us up in 48 hours, and they did. And that's where this cacao came from. It's actually, we get a premium price for it. We have a few buyers who buy it, and they pay a lot of money for it, and for which that helps. This is where I worked in the 70s. That's Cayetano Eco in front of me and two farmers whose names I don't remember to the right. This is the Toledo Cacao Growers Association, which is the depot where we had our office and where we did the buying of cacao. In my other slideshow, I know I didn't put it in here, and I probably should have because it showed all the districts of the village. But Punta Gorda is sort of the hub for Toledo district. It's like the equivalent of the county seat for a county. We have the government offices, the post offices, the banks, the shops, the place you pay for your electrical bill, all that is right there. And so, and the high school was there. The only high school at the time was there. And so all the buses feed out from these 30-something villages, feed there every day, and then go back in the evening. And so TCGA was set up to do centralized purchasing of smallholders. And as I mentioned it when I was talking about the farmers from Honduras and El Salvador up in Trio Junction, most farmers, the average cacao size is less than an acre, maybe an acre. Some farmers have 2 acres, but average is right around an acre. And so when I started out in 1997, I got hired to help because they were having problems. Basically, they were getting letters, official letters from Fair Trade and Soil Association, organic requirements, and just not responding because it was a language that was foreign to them in terms of, it's like legal, it was organic legalese. And I got hired to help with that. And I worked there for 7 years. And then when I left in 2004, I'd written a very large grant proposal. And then which we got that from the Department for International Development, which is the UK equivalent of USAID. The work environment became stressful and toxic. And it was like, look, if I'm going to work in an office, I should just go to New York City and make a lot of money instead of coming here and dealing with the stress. So I quit. But it's a great organization, and it's sort of the gold standard of what I think is possible for small producers. And a lot of this could apply to other crops, which we'll talk about, and even things like biochar, which we'll talk about that in a minute. And this is our cacao that we're exporting. I designed that bag, and it has space for what the buying date was, what village it came from, and what farmer it came from. And there was a place on there where we recorded the number of every farmer, so we could compare notes with the organic inspectors. It was fun creating that, and that was one of the biggest years that we did. Yeah, I love cacao. I still have a big thing about cacao, but it's getting supplanted by coconuts. I've got a little bit of an obsession with coconuts these days. So let me just. So globally, there are 950 million to 1.1 billion acres of degraded agricultural landscapes. These are lands that have come to the end of their productive life cycle. That they're things like former cattle pasture. They're in the tropics. It could be any of the export monocultures. In Belize, that would be sugarcane or citrus or banana. It could be pineapple, it could be whatever it is, a monoculture where like citrus has I think it's a 25-year lifespan, because I bought my citrus farm thinking I was going to get old and walk around collecting oranges from the orange trees in a loincloth with a bucket when I reached 55. And I bought it at year 27, not knowing the dieback and all the telltale signs at the end of its productive life. Somehow I missed that because I didn't have the literacy to see it. So all of these broken and degraded landscapes actually offer us possibilities, particularly for young farmers. Like I wouldn't want to go take on that project now. I'm 55 years old, but I was 22. And of course, when I was 22, I didn't realize the mistake I'd made. But I am prideful, I am stubborn, and basically I had nowhere to go. So I stuck it out and we figured it out. So anyway, pioneer species are the species that we put into a landscape to repair a landscape. And a pioneer species has 2 qualities. Number 1, it's improving the soil. And number 2, it's giving us a yield within 2 years. In line of sight here, we see cassava, which will give us a yield in 4, 5 to 6 months. Helps to break up the soil and improve the soil. There's some chaya, Canerasculus chaya mansa, or Contifolius, depending on which thing. One of my favorite things, I could see Holly doing this. That's good. It's one of my favorite things. It's basically the Special Olympics of farming. You plant it, does really well, and it's hard to mess up, and you're going to win. Yay. And then banana, which actually bananas don't change they don't fix nitrogen, but they improve the structure of the soil. They also give us yield, and they give us lots of biomass. So pioneer species are the things we go in and we put into a landscape while we're transitioning to other aspects of the landscape. Cajan is Cajan, or pigeon pea, also called gunga pea in Jamaica, or chicharo or gandules in Dominican Republic and Honduras, is a fast-growing semi-perennial tree legume. It's a shrub. It lives for 2 or 3 years. Not really a tree, but it is woody. It fixes a significant amount of carbon in the soil. It's got a substantial taproot, and it fixes lots of nitrogen in. This was actually taken in 2019 when everything else looked really sad and dry. Pigeon pea did really well. So I'm a big fan of pigeon pea. It produces really well. The leaves can be fed to rabbits. When it dies, it makes excellent biochar. It's not great fuel wood. It's great fuel wood, but you have to burn a lot of it. But you can stuff I've got a wood burning cook stove, and you stuff a whole little shrub in there, break it up, light it, put a kettle on, walk away in like 15 minutes. The kettle's boiling. There's a few embers, and it's very, very, very good for that. And it's highly productive, very, very, very productive food. Another one, we use a lot of pineapple planted on contour because we live in the Maya Mountains. The name Maya Mountain Research Farm is a geographic indicator. We're in the foothills of the Maya Mountains. And basically everywhere that we are is either a hillside, any flat area is a floodplain, or a Maya ruin, a Maya plaza, because we live in the middle of what was a very large Maya city in every direction for several miles. We're near Lubantun. Also, you see some bananas in there. This is an area my wife designed for a future coconut dominant polyculture. We got the idea that we would basically start making coconut oil and get rich and retire off of coconut oil. And about 12 batches into that, we realized we weren't either going to get rich or retire off of it. But we're still on Team Coconut. So I just bought a little expeller press to try making cold pressed coconut oil. It's, artisanal. It's going to be amazing, I imagine. Yes. But these are examples. The pineapples on contour help to accumulate nutrients uphill. Leaf litter, branches, twigs wash down, and then any soil meets the matrix of that biomass and slows down, and you start to see uphill from the pineapples actually moisture being retained into the dry season. Immediately downhill may be dry, but the uphill will start to have moisture. Banana, that's my wife Celini there, and that is a type of banana we call the Jamaica red banana. And Jamaica red banana produces a banana that is a very good hand banana. You can eat it raw. We also like to boil it or fry it. It's very good for that. You could dry it and theoretically make flour. We haven't done that yet, but we're talking about it. And the amount of biomass it gives is great for making mulch. We have we take the stems and we do something we call the Mascarenhas mulching method, where we put sort of a V around a target tree on the slope. So the V is open to the slope. And then we backfill it with leaf litter and rabbit manure and effluent from the biogas plant to boost production. It helps to retain moisture in the dry season. Yeah, so, and these are examples of some of the bananas we have. And on the left side of the screen is Pijang Rai banana from India. The one in the middle is something called apple banana. And the one on the right, you have probably guessed already. Yep, it is the Jamaica red. Good job. And then, of course, the big one behind it is what we call blogo banana, and that is a more of a cooking banana. Although children like to eat it raw, but adults don't actually eat it raw. And we also we use it for poultry feed. And when we were raising pigs, we raised pigs just to see if we could raise pigs off of perennial crops, and pigs did well off of bananas and the other things which we'll be looking at. So now we're moving to sort of the nut of the kernel of what we do here, and the main focus of what we talk about. Tropical staple trees have huge untapped potential for farmers in the lowland humid tropics, because they, while they take a few years to get established, once they are established, they are highly productive for many, many years. Productive multistrata agroforestry systems that use these species do not suffer from erosion. Actually, let me go. Anyway, I can't figure this one out, so I'll just leave it. When we, the picture of where the Jamaica red banana was is an area that had the worst erosion on the farm, and it was cattle pasture. It had both sheet erosion and gully erosion. It was down to nothing but clay, and we were able to build soil. So anyway, back to this. The buttress roots of the Artocarpus genus, in this case, the Artocarpus camansi, actually help to retain soil and build soil, and can access nutrients and soil moisture that thin and short-rooted plants like grasses such as corn or rice or sorghum are just simply not going to be able to reach. And once established, you don't have to reestablish it and plant it every year. It just literally drops food. I do have the I do actually walk around with my bucket. I have a bucket, and earlier this year I bought myself a samurai sword shaped machete. It was a kind of a frivolous waste of money, but I really like it. I feel, anyway, I get to walk around and yeah. Anybody know Toshiro Mifune? Anyway, if you do, I do a good Toshiro Mifune impersonation. Anyway, so I walk around and I collect my food from underneath that. And this is probably the most important tree species that we grow here in terms of food security. Another one, of course, is the breadfruit. I know that breadfruit grows in Hawaii. Holly we were just talking about that. Breadfruit is another one of these huge potential for food security. Highly productive once established. It can yield every year in perpetuity. It has multiple uses for it. It is not as productive as the bread nut, and in fact, actually, the bread nut was once considered to be a cultivar of the breadfruit, and then the taxonomy changed from Artocarpus altilis variety seminifera to Artocarpus camansi. I do think that there's a secret lodge of botanists that periodically change the name so they can sell new editions of textbooks, and I'm waiting for them to tap me in the chest so I can join. This is another one. This is actually Brossum malacostrum, also known as bread nut, also called Ramon nut, and it is one of the trees that grows down here. I don't know if it will grow where you guys are, but it might. It is another highly productive plant species. All the times I've been wandering around lost in the jungle back in my 20s, wherever we saw Ramon trees towering above us in high density, we were in the middle of a Maya urban polity of some kind, of like an abandoned city or an abandoned settlement. And so they were very high density out in the jungle, and you find them close to Maya ruins. And again, 7.5 tons per acre, and the leaves are high quality fodder. The chicaleros, when they used to go out into the bush to bleed the sapodilli tree for chewing gum, that's what they fed to their animals. And so big fan of that as well. Another one is Bactris gassipace, also known as Pedgibaya or peach palm. This is one of the trees that we like. We are in the very northern range of it, and this is an area we pioneered into about, I guess it would have been maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 at the outside, because the tree is now bearing. It is a fast-growing palm. It produces multiple stems from the bottom, so it's also useful for eating the heart of palm. If you get a big cluster of them, you can thin them out and get the heart of palm. The fruit itself is tastes like a cross between a cassava and a pumpkin. It's got a lot of beta carotene. It's fibrous, and in the very center of it is a small little seed which has we call a little coconut, a lili coconut. It's got a small little fruit that looks a lot like a coconut nut, and this is another one of the staple foods. My wife and I had a consultancy in Peru, and when we went there, and we had it before then, but when we didn't eat a lot of it. But when we went there, we saw how they ate it, and we actually became bigger fans of it than we had been previously. So again, another staple tree that could replace some of the corn or the rice or the sorghum that people are growing for their staple foods. So this is our good friend Marlon Sutherland, who lived with us for a little less than a year. He and I went out one morning and in about 45 minutes collected all of that, a bunch of different bananas and some coconuts and some pineapples. And what you can't see is off camera, off of his right shoulder, are 2 buckets full of bread nut. And we could see a big smile on his face. We weren't working hard. We were just walking around joking, and this is what we collected. We got a lot of food, and it wasn't very involved. And because now that the system is set up. So basically, the difference between annual cultivation is that you're spending a lot of energy trying to maintain a static condition. We're going to have a field for annuals here. Now you might shift your annuals. We're going to do a corn here. Next year, we're going to do some soybeans. Next year after that, we'll do kidney beans. The year after that, we'll do some sorghum. Maybe we'll go back into corn. But you're still fighting to maintain this static condition of a field. You're weeding, and you might be plowing and disking, and all that. And what we're doing is we're doing the equivalent of biological Aikido. We're using the power of succession, and we're managing that succession to go from this open landscape to this closed canopy forest where every step of the way we're getting a yield. And that's what it looks like. This is just an example of one day. Other things, we're talking now a lot about something that I call slow farming. There's slow food and there's slow money. And slow farming is how do we take advantage of the nutrients that are available in a farm and on their way passing through. This is a termite nest that I found growing on a tree, and I peeled it off with my machete and hauled it home with the bucket, and I feed it to the chickens. Poultry eat a lot of things that we don't want to eat. So you get spoiled food, you feed it to the poultry. Things like termites, I've tried them. I've eaten a termite just to, and they're nutty. I can't imagine sitting down to a bowl of termites. Not, thank you very much, but probably not going to happen. And termites can take things that we don't want to eat and convert them into things we do eat. So I mostly eat eggs, but we do serve chicken on the farm for our students. And my wife eats a little bit of chicken now and again. And animals are a big part of it. We raised pigs for a while. Again, we had a pig. It was a nice pig. Then there was the pig formerly known as Pig Bitch. There was MD for mentally deficient, and then there was Runty. And then, of course, we had Romeo the boar. And we changed, we had Pig Bitch, which was somebody said on the internet, you can't call an animal, it's a dog, a pig bitch is a female dog. We're like, yeah, we know. And said, that's her name. And said, oh, that's not very nice. Like, you don't understand how much affection there was in that name. She was a fantastic mother, but she was greedy as a pig. I mean, we'd put out food for her and her babies, and she'd park her nose under the baby and toss it across the pen just to eat as much as so. And we did that, and we found out that actually you can raise pigs off of a perennial diet. It ended up being more work than it was worth because we don't eat pork. And we sold pigs, we sold piglets, and it was a good experiment, but we discontinued it just because it was taking up too much of our time. Oh, wait, hold on, wait a minute. Oh, wait, okay, good. Okay, good. I was missing a slide. I got worried. So there's another aspect to what we do. One of the things that when we cook food, when we're cooking food for the pigs, we cooked bread nut, we cooked banana, plantain, cassava, cocoyam. We would cook them in a biochar kiln. And so making biochar is a process called pyrolysis, where you're heating up biomass in an oxygen depleted environment so that it off gases everything but the carbon. And then you use that heat for something. Some people make biochar just to make biochar. I live in an area where everybody cooks with fuel wood, and we could never get anybody to go burn just for the sake of making charcoal, because then they're like, okay, now we burn the charcoal. It's like, no, now you bury it. And they're like, no, that doesn't make any sense. So we found a way to harvest it so we could cook things like the bread nut and the breadfruit and seed for jackfruit, peach balm, all the stuff, all the perennials that we had to feed to our pigs. And we also do that for our rabbits, our chickens rather. On the left side of the screen is an example of some of the feedstock we use. Right there, you can see those are cacao pods that is either spontaneously aborted or had Shirel wilt and dried on the tree. We also use things like corn cobs, corn trash, rice hulls, cahoon seed, coconut husk, and we convert them into charcoal. And then we're using it when we had pigs. We're using it as bedding for the pigs, and then periodically cleaning out the pig house and composting that and using it to plant. Now, my very good friend, I usually have a slide and I didn't put it in, Albert Bates. I don't know if anybody knows Albert Bates or heard of Albert Bates, but he's one of the people that I have a great deal of respect and affection for him, because he was one of the people that came here and understood what I was talking about. He and I have taught together in various capacities for the last 12 years, 13 years. And he's helped me out a lot. He wrote a great book called The Biochar Solution. And then he wrote a book called Burn, with Kathleen Draper, which is as good as Biochar Solution, but it actually talks about some of the stuff that we're planning to do in this watershed, where we convert surplus carbon into biochar, which is a non-labile form of carbon that can be added to soil. Next slide. This is an example of what charcoal looks like, or biochar looks like, with a microscope. If you look at a piece of biochar or charcoal, it looks solid, but if you look at it with a magnifying glass, you start to see the pores. But if you look at it with a really good magnifying glass, you see that there is a lot of space and there's a lot of surface area. 1 gram of charcoal, depending on the feedstock that it made it with, can have up to a football field size, or at least a basketball court to football field size amount of surface area, one surface with 2 sides. And all of that is habitat for your soil microorganisms, things like fungi, bacteria, and nematodes, and other microorganisms. On that trip when we went to Peru, I knew where we were going wasn't going to have electricity and also wouldn't have internet. So I left my computer at home and I bought Albert's book, which had been sitting up there on the shelf, accusing me of not reading it. I picked it up and got distracted. So I bought it with me and I finished it before we left, before we flew from here to El Salvador, from El Salvador to Colombia. And I think I finished it before we got out of Colombia. It's a very good book. And again, more different feedstocks. So some of the feedstocks that we're looking at that are commonly available are things like, you can see the cacao pods. There's some corn cobs in there, cacao pods, corn cobs. There's coconut husks. All of these work. Rice hulls, anything that would otherwise oxidize. Sawdust could be, because once it oxidizes, it goes back into the environment as carbon. If we do this, all of that carbon is basically very stable. And if ground up and inoculated, if you put it in the soil, it would be there for at least 400 years. And so it's actually a way to rapidly decarbonize the environment and stick it in the ground. It also, a little anecdote that we had, we were planting cacao in 2015 and no, 2014 rather. And we had James, I can't remember James's last name. He was a PhD, worked at Toledo Institute for Development and Environment. He came out and he was just a friend. We would come out, James Lord. He would come out and visit us on the weekend because we had pizza and we'd talk, and he was an interesting guy. And we were planting out cacao, and we were putting the biochar compost mix in, and he said, "Oh, Christopher, you can't do that. You've got to put some aside as a control. Otherwise you're just drinking the Kool-Aid." So we did. I didn't want to, I really wanted to do it. And then we got hit by a very hard dry in 2015. And every single one of the trees that didn't get the biochar died. And pretty much all the trees that did get the biochar survived. So I went from being this makes sense to like true believer, and so that's an example of why I like biochar. And this is from a manual that we wrote with Yakshay Conservation Trust, which you can download. It gives you plans on how to make that, and a couple pages on biochar and some other stuff that we're doing. And we built this out of ubiquitous and sort of available anywhere on the planet sort of things, old propane tanks and old 55-gallon drums. Most people have access to that. Oh, we did that. Okay. Biogas and slow farming. So a few years ago, a woman named Kathy Puffer, there's kind of a long convoluted story, which I won't go into, but I was trying to track somebody down who ripped me off for about $500 when I couldn't afford it. It was a loan. And a great woman named Kathy Puffer, who's was part of something called the Solar Cities Biogas Organization, contacted me and said, "Hey, we will come make you a biogas plant." I didn't include pictures of the biogas plant. I just probably should have, but it's a simple one made from old industrial bulk containers, and one for the actual biogas generation, and two of them that have been cut and modified to be like a floating gas system. Works really well. I love biogas. And it takes a lot of the surplus food that would otherwise get wasted, particularly now that we don't have pigs, and converts it to biogas, which we cook with, and also to the slurry, which is a fantastic fertilizer. So again, it's a way of taking this surplus food. Sure, we could compost it, but then it's done. But if we make the biogas, then we get the effluent. It's already composted, and we can use it as a fertilizer. A big believer in that. So we're coming towards the end of my production. Thank you for not falling asleep. This is one of the subcanopy species we really like, ginger. We've been planting lots and lots of ginger for a long time. And I think we were preparing for the pandemic. We sold about a ton of ginger this last year into the local market because everybody's concerned about COVID. And so ginger was a very good one. It's a subcanopy species that likes shade. It needs some shade. And it does really well. And it's part of the culinary traditions of the East Indian people where we live. Some of the villages where we live were people that were bought over as indentured servants in the 1870s to work for Confederate war refugees. And then in other parts of the country were bought over after the failed Sepoy Rebellion. So they brought their culinary traditions with them. And that's a big one. Everybody in Belize loves ginger. Another one is, this is turmeric. This is, it was my wife there with our dog, who sadly died. Amber Albee, who was a Peace Corps, and our good friend, Bernie Sanders, who just happened to be here and helped us out there. It wasn't very helpful because of the gloves and the parka he was wearing, but there he is. Turmeric is actually a fantastic crop for subcanopy species. They're a big tradition. Also, this was also introduced by the East Indians. There is a big market for turmeric. We sold, about a ton of turmeric this last year, and before that, we were selling about a half a ton every year. My wife's auntie owns the spice shop at the Queen Square Market in Belize City, so we usually sell it through her. But it's a really good one, and we go back a few slides back to the concept of centralized purchasing for exportation. It would be a very good way for smallholders to access international markets that any single individual smallholder is not going to be able to access. There's a great company called Toledo, which is actually exporting turmeric, but the amount of production that's already in Toledo exceeds what she wants. So we are looking into ways that we could access those markets with our good friend Bernie Sanders. This is vanilla. Usually most years we would get, 3 or 4 pods on the thing, because vanilla really prefers hand pollination, and I'm way too lazy to hand pollinate, and will accept whatever local pollination does, which we think is either the little melipinoni bees rather, or midges. We're not sure, because where we're seeing heavy fruit set is near the cacao areas where we have lots of cacao, and the woodpeckers come and they break a pod, midges move in to colonize it, and then they come out. We know that the midges are pollinating the cacao, but we see increased fruit set close to where we see the broken pods. And so vanilla is another very high value crop that it's actually like cacao. It's native to here. You can go out in the jungle and you can find vanilla. And this is, we have vanilla planifolia, vanilla hartia, and vanilla pompona. And there's a few other vanillas that are existing in where we live that we may or may not have, because my taxonomy is imperfect on vanilla. It's not one of these things I know. I spread a little thin intellectually, but it's a very high value crop, and we like vanilla a lot. I like to put it in my coffee, and we also produce coffee. So this is the penultimate slide of the show. The question is forest or farm, and it goes back to this discussion that they were having about, that stemmed from the techno Swiss solution with this multi-million-dollar machine that would scrub the atmosphere of carbon dioxide and inject it into bedrock, and whether or not that was effective. And then of course somebody saying, no, we need to afforest the world. And we do need to afforest the world, and we do need to plant as many trees as possible where trees are possible. I'm not going to advocate, in deference to my friend Alan Savory, I'm not going to advocate planting out trees into grassland where cattle can graze, because there is some evidence that cattle in natural grasslands actually help to hold carbon in the soil. But in degraded landscapes, the low-hanging fruit for us is to plant trees. We had some French students who are here. They showed up in the middle of a big push to plant cacao. We were all working in the nursery nonstop. And so they were here for like 3 days, and they were increasingly unhappy. You could kind of read it. And finally, they decided they'd have their little rebellion, and they came, and I'll spare you my French accent. But they came and they said, Christopher, that's it. We're leaving. We came here to see permaculture, and there's no permaculture here. Where are your vegetables? You're supposed to have vegetables. So I went to a permaculture farm in France, and they had little rows of vegetables, and you have no vegetables. And I said, well, look, first of all, it was a little offensive to say that we hadn't done anything. But on the other hand, it's a big compliment, because, oh, it's jungle. That's kind of the aesthetic we're looking for. So that they couldn't see, because their visual literacy and their botanic literacy was so low for the environment they were in. They thought that all the trees that they walked through, all the shade they walked under was just here. And we decided to put some cabins randomly in this forest. And so I explained it to them. I said, okay, remember the green you ate? That was chaya. And remember the hummus that you ate? That's actually bread nut. And and we explained some of the things that they'd been eating, and how it came out of the food forest. They ended up leaving anyway, because I think a lot of people think when they say, oh, we're going to go to a permaculture farm, it's going to be all glamorous and perhaps sexy, and and it kind of is, but it's sedated glamorous and sort of sedated sexy, that not quite what they thought it was. We don't have a hot tub. And they ended up leaving. But the aesthetic of creating a forest in our farms is what we're aiming for. We have a limited amount of time to set the planet right. And on a good day, I feel that's possible. And on a bad day, I don't think it's possible. And today actually happens to be a good day, because you guys are interested, and I'm here, and that's nice. And I think that the world that my children are going to inherit is very different than the world that I inherited. There was so much possibility, and there was, and now there's all these limitations coming up, and we have the ruling class deciding that they're going to blast off for little vanity trips to the edge of space for 12 minutes and cost $5 billion doing that. And $5 billion could plant a lot of trees. Not only a lot of trees, it could train a lot of farmers to plant a lot of trees and provide them with seeds and nurseries and extension programs and education and photovoltaic systems for water pumping, and a whole bunch of things could be done with that money besides 12-minute little vanity blasts off into space.
We're going to do all those things, Christopher. That
Good.
list of things that you just said, I think everybody on this Zoom, I'm sorry some had to leave, but is committed to making those things happen. But we don't necessarily know how. There's a lot of questions in the chat. I don't know if you see them, Gary, and you want to ask them, but there's some of them in the chat and I've received some.
Okay, now hold on. I'm going to try and leave I don't know what I'm doing here.
Oh, okay. And we'll go to the very top and there should be stop share for your screen.
Okay.
To the very, very top, up above where you are. You got it.
All right, we're back.
You got it.
All right.
And I have a list of questions, but there's a bunch in the chat. Did you want to ask some of them? We have about 10 minutes or so. 15
Oh, I used up all the time. Sorry.
No, you didn't, because we're all still here. And this was a fascinating, awesome presentation that I will make sure everybody that attended that had to leave early, plus all of our friends that didn't make it, will get a recording. So,
Christopher, thank you so much. Just so much information and so inspiring. I want to come down and see what you're doing and work with you for a while. Anyway, question, what do you think are the most important actions we need to take in Southwest Florida to really make a difference in lowering greenhouse gases and helping reduce the impact of the climate crisis in Southwest Florida?
So I've actually thought about this because a few years ago, I looked at the possibility of leaving here, and Florida was on the list of places I might go. And it was like 15 years ago, and I was looking at options like, so one of the things is if you could focus on the amount of waste that Florida generates in terms of food waste, byproducts from, you have a small sugarcane industry, and if you could convert your food waste into methane, you could take your sugarcane and instead of burning the bagasse to make electricity, convert that to biochar, and then of course use that as water filtration for effluent leaving the sugarcane fields going elsewhere, so you don't have downstream pollution. And of course, backyard farming. I mean, I look at the pictures of Alex's place when he does his slideshow here, and I'm just like, wow, I mean, what you can do with a backyard in Florida, and that's really cool. So there's a lot of stuff that can be done. The question is, how do you convince people to do that? And it's one of the blessings of COVID, because probably much like Florida's probably similar to Belize, is that our tourism industry, which was the bulk of our economy, is dead. I mean, it's just dead. We have a little bit of arrivals now. We still have cruise ships coming, but the writing's on the wall. What we're seeing now is a return to the farms and people interested in producing food in a way that they weren't 2.5 years ago. So that's a positive thing. Yes.
Great, thank you. Real practical question raised by some folks concerned about our food forest. How do you avoid having rats and other pests in your home being so close to the fruit trees? And what is the best natural ways to control rats?
Probably best that we live in a diverse area. We have 2 dogs. We don't have any cats because we used to have a cat and we never had any rats when we had cats. But we also didn't have lizards and we didn't have bats and lots of other things that we want. So cats actually have a place in the house. Where we live, we have lots of different snakes. We have other predators. We have all the cats that I was talking about earlier. We have the little gray fox. We have foxes. And so there's a fair amount of predators that keep that in control. We have raptors that also keep the rodents in control. So it's more about finding the balance. And I don't know what that looks like for a suburban or peri-urban environment. Because I know that most people freak out when they see a snake. I also know, because my grandmother lived in Florida, that you guys have lots of snakes and alligators and, you know, all kinds of cool things that might be, if not gang pressed into assisting you with your pest population, but have a role in controlling the numbers.
No, that's great. One of the things that we talked about as we're talking about developing a food forest like the one Alex has on our campus where the Reset Center is perhaps building an owl house. And we have a pair of red-shouldered hawks and we have a pair of eagles nearby. And I kind of think that would take care of everything.
Yeah.
Plus I've heard of wrapping the bottom of taller trees with something so that little critters can't climb up them. Do you know about that? Doing that? Anyway, there's more questions, you know. Let's see.
There's
Oh,
a question about vertical gardening.
Oh,
and
yes, very good.
I'm wondering if you're in the middle of a food forest, if there's room for vertical gardening.
Yes and no. The gardening is vertical anyway because of the trees, but not in the context that they're talking about. Vertical gardening has a place. Our immediate area around us, there's this is why we built a 3-story house, is so that we could put our solar panels way up in the air, even though while we were building it, many of the trees were not as tall as they are now. But there are patches in here where things are, you could do vertical gardening, either like an herb spiral or a drum with holes punched in the side and plants growing out. It could be done, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually that, in terms of urban, what I'm doing is old school, like move off into the middle of nowhere on a degraded piece of land and fix it up and do permaculture. That's very old school. The new frontier for agriculture and permaculture, more than half the planet lives in an urban environment, and they've got to eat every day. So the question is, how do we maximize that food production? Vertical gardening has a place. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering if you've got any, you said that you moved on to degraded land, and I'm wondering if you've got any measurements in the sense of the quality of the land that you purchased and the quality of the soil that you have now.
It's all anecdotal. I am not an academic. My research is in the broadest sense. But what we are seeing is areas that nothing wanted to grow. We're actually getting stuff to grow there by intensely planting an area with pigeon pea and then putting in cassava and improving the soil structure. And we're seeing that. The buttress roots of the Artocarpus comanche species, that the breadnut that we showed, they have buttress roots and they're actually holding soil, and we're getting soil deposited around them and building up. So we're actually building soil. And the key to that here, because the amount of rain, it's like beginning to rain again, is deep-rooted tree crops. And so that's what works for us. And it might be different somewhere else. And then the question of, because we have a very large piece of land, we're cultivating about 30 acres of land right now. We have 70 acres of land to work with. That's not the limitation somebody else would face. So those are things that work for us, just planting trees.
Okay, great. Holly, do you have another question? You're muted.
You asked 2 of the questions that were on my mind, and one of them was about, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. But there's some other questions in here. One of them were, what do you think are the most important or influential books? Maybe you could stick them in the chat. And one of the other ones was from the same person, from Robert Beatty. I think that his question was, about will you be accepting interns in Belize in the future? And he also wanted to know why you cook the fruit before feeding to animals. And I get the biochar part, but he wants to know why the animals, I think, need to have food cooked for them.
Well, things like cassava, they have there's cyanide in the cassava, and that needs to be boiled to make it palatable. And then things like bread nut is hard to chew. For birds, can't chew it. Pigs will still eat it, but they're not enthused about it. You boil it with a little bit of salt and or molasses, and they go crazy for it. Things like unripe bananas are not enjoyable if to eat raw. Not for us, not for the animals. But once they're boiled, the animals enjoy them. So that's why, mostly to make it to improve their palatability.
Okay, and Holly, I see another question here, that Florida is karst and limestone based, yet so much agriculture happens here. What will happen to our aquifer if we continue the ways we are with sugar, tomatoes, and also cattle ranching?
Well, that is the big problem, and that's the problem pretty much everywhere, is that the status quo, which billions of dollars are thrown at it every year in research and justification, there's a known set of consequences, and one of them is that you're going to damage your downstream aquatic communities. Whether here where I live, whether that's the river, that there are still people that drink water out of the river. So if I was using herbicide up here, which I don't, I would be putting my neighbors downstream at risk. For you guys, it's if you're using biocides at surface level, it's not a question of if it's going to end up in the aquifer. It will. It's a question of how much and what's the concentration. And it's part of the insidious nature of these biocides that all the Roundup is safe until cancer. So it's safe until the threshold of cancer. And this is a problem in that there's a problem in that thinking, that the systemic thinking that says that it's okay until it's not okay. And then and I'll get off on a little rant here for a second, but when I hear people say things like least harm, it's like, yeah, okay, least harm, but there's still harm. Can't you come up with a better solution than one? It's like, okay, I'll change the metaphor a little bit because I'm in polite company, but getting hit on the head with a small stick or getting hit on the head with a big stick, you're still getting hit on the head. And so it's a real problem. And the problem is that the dominant paradigm looks at the equation like this. They look at it on the wood side. You have cost of labor, cost of inputs, cost of capitalization, amortized over time versus kilograms per hectare. And if you're making more money over here than you spent there, that's profitable. But what is the actual cost of the downstream damage this year, next year, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Yes.
I've seen this. That's a good answer. I've seen the same question twice. And so I saw Bonnie Clancy just posted it again, and she wanted to know if bread nut fruit, the Ramon nut fruit, can grow in our zone, which is 10A. And if there's time, what are the ingredients of your pizza pesto?
I'm glad anybody, it's a family secret, but I'll let you in on it. I'll do the pesto first. Is basically what we call it's the Maya basil. It's a I forget what something Campechiano, whatever they call basil, the first part of it. And it's a local basil that Maya people use, and that's like a bunch of it, and then moringa leaves, strip in moringa leaves, garlic and olive oil. That's it. And we don't have pine nuts, so if you really, you can add things like substitute cashew pieces, nibs for that if you want. That's nice. And as for what was the other part of the question?
Did you know if we could actually grow the bread nut here?
Alex would know that better than me.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
We can hear Alex.
Alex, wonderful.
Yeah, so Rosmalacastrum does grow quite well here. I've seen mature trees and I'm currently growing about 15 of them at various plots. And they're all doing fine and they managed to get through the winter so far pretty good.
Good.
Good to know. Good to know. Maybe we can help plant some around the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, Holly, if there are other questions about book titles and things like that. Is there a way that we can include that information in what we're going to post for people to be able to have access to?
Yeah, how about we do this since the time is up? As soon as this Zoom is over, I'll download the recording and then I'll send it to everybody that signed up, including those that didn't come. And then meanwhile, Christopher, if you have the time for a few book suggestions, send them to me and I'll include that in an email to everybody.
There are two books called Tropical Agroforestry, and they're written by different people, and I can't remember who wrote them. They're very, very good books, and very deep. And I've got a whole list. I don't know where they all are anymore, but I'll try and find them.
Yeah, and that's an academic book, right? I think that's P.K. Nair. He's a professor.
That's one of them, yes.
At University of Florida. Yeah, he's phenomenal. Great researcher.
Okay, I do want to make an announcement before we end. We try to promote as much as we can our waterkeeper friends. So the Collier County Waterkeeper is beginning two different series. One is a documentary series, and it's going to be at the Silver Spot Cinema.
Oh, nice.
The first one is on January the 19th at 6 o'clock. Those seats are limited. There's only about 80 seats that they sell for that. So the documentary series, if you're interested, you should probably book. And the second one is a distinguished speaker series, and that will be at the Norris Center in Naples. And that one starts on January the 25th. And that is Harold Wainless from the University of Miami and Dr. John Capis. So
oh yeah, he's great.
If anybody's interested, there will be an article in Natural Awakenings for the January issue, but for anybody who's on here that wants to check out, that's the Collier County Waterkeeper.
Great. Linda, thank you so much for that. It's really good to support our water keepers in all of our counties. So just our next reset conversation is going to be exciting too. And I have Alex to thank again, because we're going to have the well-known Eric Holmesmeyer speak. He's author of a number of books, including The Carbon Farming Solution, and he's really into regenerative agriculture. And I believe that he has been part of Project Drawdown. And so we will have a great drawdown discussion next month. It will be on a Saturday because we want students to be able to come. So I believe it's Saturday, January 5th, when I'll be sending you all around invitations to that. It should be a really great session with him. You know him, right, Christopher? Eric, yeah.
Yeah, Eric's amazing. I spent time with him in Cuba personally, and of course I've read everything he's written.
Yes.
He's a walking encyclopedia of plants. It was fun. He introduced to me to species I didn't know in Cuba, and he made one mistake and misidentified one species, and I was able to correct them. And I felt like I'd won the Olympics or something, because the guy is a walking spigot of information, just putting forth plant information. He's utterly brilliant. I have a huge amount of respect for him.
Well, I think you're a walking encyclopedia too of knowledge. And you have just, I hate to say fire hose because it doesn't sound very nice, but you have saturated us with new knowledge and inspiration to grow more food and to plant more trees, at least for food, for fuel. And we didn't get to hear in detail about the biogas production that you do, but I think it's very awesome. So thank you so much, Christopher.
Welcome. Well, thank you very much for having me. I hope I'm here. I'll try to be here to listen to Eric, because I have so much respect for him. Thank you, Alex. I can see you there.
Yeah.
for inviting me. And thank you, Holly, for having me and Linda.
You're very welcome. We really want to engage with you more, and it's something that my friend Susan Mills, you see her on there. She's been sending me little messages about how we can engage with you more in a whole circular design of sharing information about what we're learning about why we need to plant trees, agroforestry, permaculture, everything. So we're going to be talking to you more, Christopher. You've
Awesome.
really inspired us.
Thank you. All right.
Thank-
Well,
Thank you all for coming and hanging in here for an hour and a half. It's really awesome.
Wonderful to see you all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye.
bye, everybody.
Thank
See
you,
next
Christopher. Alex,
You're
if you can stay on for a minute.
Alex.
Oh, did Alex go? Stay on for a minute
He's
if you
still on.
can, Alex. Just because I need to ask you a logistical question,
time. Okay.
a very
All right.
simple one. It's
Bye,
about
guys.
you, Christopher.
Thanks again.
I figured it out. I'll harass Alex later.
Okay, good. We just want to make sure that we give Christopher an honorarium for his time, for his precious
Thank you.
time. And so feel free to donate directly to the Maya Farm, or you can donate to Reset. And the more you donate to us, the more we can share it with the community that shares with us. So thank you all so much. And
Bye-bye.
Will, how great to see you here today.
Equally, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye. Have a
Bye-bye.
great evening.